A kindness unseen. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the Starbucks cafe, mingling with the soft hum of conversations, the occasional clatter of cups, and the rhythmic whirring of espresso machines. It was a typical bustling afternoon, where customers came and went, their lives momentarily intertwining in this small, cozy space. Maggie Sinclair, a young barista with warm hazel eyes and an ever-present kind smile, was finishing up her shift. She had been working at this Starbucks for over a year, her days spent crafting cappuccinos, jotting down intricate drink orders, and exchanging pleasantries with customers. But unlike many, she carried an innate sense of empathy, one that often got her into trouble. As she wiped down the counters, her gaze flickered toward the large glass window near the entrance. Sitting outside, her frail figure hunched against the cold, was an elderly woman. Her clothes were tattered, layers of old fabric barely shielding her from the biting wind. Her thin fingers clutched a nearly empty cup, her eyes distant yet longing as she observed people passing by without a second glance. Maggie had seen her before. Alice. She didn't know much about the woman, only that she appeared at the cafe every few days, sometimes rummaging through discarded cups for remnants of drinks. Other times, she simply sat there, staring into nothingness. Maggie felt a pang in her heart. The closing shift always left an abundance of unsold pastries, muffins, croissants, bagels, destined for the trash. It sickened her to think of perfectly good food going to waste when there were people like Alice struggling to find their next meal. Biting her lip, she glanced around. The manager, Carter, was in the back, busy with inventory. A few customers lingered at tables, some working on laptops, others engaged in hushed conversations. With a deep breath, Maggie made her decision. She reached for a muffin from the tray, chocolate chip, still warm. Carefully wrapping it in a napkin, she moved toward the door, her heart pounding. "Alice," she whispered, crouching beside the elderly woman. Alice looked up, her tired eyes widening slightly in surprise. "For you," Maggie said, pressing the muffin into her hands. Alice hesitated, her fingers trembling as they closed around the offering. "Oh dear, I can't." "It's okay," Maggie assured her, smiling. "I want you to have it." For a moment, Alice simply stared at the muffin as if it were the most precious thing in the world. Then, with a grateful nod, she whispered, "Thank you, child." Maggie felt warmth spread through her chest, a small act of kindness brightening her long day. But before she could say anything more, a sharp voice sliced through the air. "Maggie, what the hell do you think you're doing?" She froze. The cafe fell silent. Customers turned their heads as Carter, the store manager, stormed toward her. His face was flushed red with anger, his thick eyebrows furrowed in disbelief. Maggie slowly stood, her heart hammering against her ribs. She began, but Carter cut her off. "Are you out of your mind? You know company policy. Leftover food cannot be given away. That's theft." "It's not theft," Maggie protested. "It was going in the trash." "I don't care," Carter bellowed, his voice echoing across the cafe. "You do not make that call. Do you know how this reflects on us? How this could cost us?" Maggie opened her mouth to argue, but the look in his eyes told her it was useless. Alice shrank back, clutching the muffin to her chest. "Please, sir, it was just." "Stay out of this," Carter snapped at her, before turning his wrath back on Maggie. "You're done. Get your things and leave. You're fired." A gasp rippled through the cafe. Maggie felt the air leave her lungs. "Fired. Just like that." "But," "I said leave," Carter spat, his voice low and final. Maggie swallowed hard, blinking against the sting of tears. She had known there might be consequences for her actions, but this, over a single muffin. As she turned toward the back to grab her belongings, she caught sight of a man sitting quietly in the farthest corner of the cafe. He had been there for some time, his presence unnoticed amid the chaos. Dressed in a simple black jacket and jeans, his dark hair slightly tousled, he exuded an effortless calm. His chiseled features were partially hidden beneath the shadow of a baseball cap, but his piercing gaze was unmistakable. Keanu Reeves. The realization sent a jolt through Maggie. He had seen everything, and unlike the other customers, who had either looked away or remained silent, Keanu's expression was unreadable, yet intense. He watched Carter for a long moment, then slowly turned his eyes to Maggie. And in that instant, something shifted. Maggie wasn't sure what it was. Perhaps a silent understanding, a flicker of approval. But as she gathered her things, she had no idea that this was only the beginning. Keanu Reeves had witnessed her act of kindness, and he wasn't about to let it go unnoticed. An unexpected encounter. The cold air outside the Starbucks cafe bit into Maggie's skin as she stepped out, her breath visible in the evening chill. The echoes of Carter's anger still rang in her ears, her heart a twisted knot of frustration, disbelief, and sorrow. Fired. Over a single muffin. She clenched her fists, staring at the sidewalk, watching people pass by in a blur of motion. Businessmen hurrying home, teenagers laughing over their phones, couples lost in their own world. No one noticed her. No one cared. Except one. A deep, steady voice broke through her fog of despair. "Hey." Maggie turned sharply, her breath catching. Keanu Reeves stood a few feet away, his hands tucked into his jacket pockets, his expression unreadable. The dim glow of the street lamp cast a golden hue over his face, emphasizing the sharp contours of his jawline, the quiet intensity in his dark eyes. She blinked, momentarily stunned. "You're Keanu Reeves," she murmured, as if saying his name would confirm he was actually standing there. A small, knowing smile flickered across his lips. "Yeah. And you're Maggie." Maggie's eyebrows furrowed. "How do you?" "I heard Carter yell at you," he said with a slight shrug. "That was unfair. What happened in there?" Maggie let out a dry laugh, running a hand through her tousled brown hair. "Tell me about it." Keanu tilted his head slightly, studying her. "You okay?" The simple question nearly unraveled her. She wanted to say yes, to brush it off like she always did, but something about his presence, his genuine concern, made her throat tighten. "I don't know," she admitted softly. He nodded, as if he understood exactly what she meant. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. "I'm not saying this makes it better," he said, handing it to her. "But I know someone who runs a community kitchen. They always need good people. If you're interested." Maggie stared at the card. Street Vincent's Community Kitchen. Helping hands, open hearts. "You want me to work in a soup kitchen?" she asked, surprised. Keanu gave a small chuckle. "I want you to keep doing what you do best, helping people." Maggie hesitated. She was still reeling from what had just happened. A few minutes ago, she was a Starbucks barista. Now, she was unemployed, standing outside in the cold, talking to Keanu freaking Reeves, who was offering her a potential lifeline. Her stomach clenched with uncertainty. I appreciate it," she said, gripping the card. I don't know if I'm ready." Keanu nodded. "I get it. But when you are, just call the number." Maggie glanced at him again, searching his face for some hidden agenda. But there was none. Just quiet sincerity. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. He smiled, his eyes crinkling at the edges. "Because I saw what you did, and the world needs more people like you." She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, Keanu stepped back. "I have to go," he said. "But take care of yourself, Maggie." And just like that, he walked away, disappearing into the flow of the city, leaving Maggie standing there, still holding the business card, her mind racing. The weight of choices. That night, Maggie lay awake in her tiny apartment, staring at the ceiling. Her thoughts were a chaotic mess. She should have been angry, at Carter, at Starbucks, at the unfairness of it all. And yet she couldn't stop thinking about Keanu Reeves. "The world needs more people like you." His words repeated in her head over and over, like a song stuck on loop. The next morning, She woke up to reality hitting her hard. She had rent to pay, bills to cover, no income. She needed a new job. Fast. Her first instinct was to apply at another coffee shop. Maybe a local cafe that wouldn't have such ridiculous policies. But something inside her hesitated. Instead, she found herself staring at the business card. She had nothing to lose. Before she could second-guess herself, she grabbed her phone and dialed the number. A woman's warm voice answered. "Street Vincent's Community Kitchen. This is Mary speaking." "Hi," Maggie said, clearing her throat. I was told you might need volunteers, or staff." Mary perked up instantly. "Oh, absolutely. We could always use extra hands. Are you looking for paid work or just volunteering?" Paid, if possible," Maggie admitted, feeling a bit embarrassed. "Of course. We actually have an opening for a kitchen assistant. Do you have experience working with food?" Maggie exhaled. "I was a barista for over a year, and I can definitely handle a kitchen." Mary chuckled. "Sounds good to me. Can you come in today for a trial shift?" Maggie hesitated, but then she thought of Keanu's words. "I'm in. A new beginning." Street Vincent's was nothing like Starbucks. The moment she stepped inside, she was met with the comforting scent of home-cooked meals. Volunteers bustled about, chopping vegetables, stirring pots, and plating food. Laughter and chatter filled the air, a stark contrast to the corporate rigidity she had left behind. Mary, a kind woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair, welcomed her warmly. "Maggie, right? Come on in. Let me show you around." Within an hour, Maggie was elbow-deep in work, helping prepare meals, serving plates, and chatting with the guests who came in for food. It was overwhelming. It was exhausting. It was fulfilling. Unlike Starbucks, where customers barely acknowledged her existence, here people looked at her, spoke to her, thanked her. And then, near the end of her shift, she saw her. Alice, the elderly woman she had given the muffin to. Maggie's breath caught as she watched Alice step inside hesitantly, glancing around with weary eyes. When their gazes met, recognition flickered across Alice's face. "Child," she whispered, her voice trembling. Maggie's heart swelled. She rushed over, taking Alice's hands in hers. "Come on. Let's get you a real meal." Tears shimmered in Alice's eyes as Maggie led her to a table, a plate of hot food in her hands. As she set it down, a familiar voice rang out behind her. "Good to see you here, Maggie." She turned. Keanu stood in the doorway, watching her with a proud smile. Maggie's lips parted in surprise. "You?" He gave her a knowing nod. "Told you this was where you belonged." And for the first time in a long while, Maggie felt it too. A ripple of change. The hum of voices, the clatter of dishes, and the warmth of a bustling kitchen wrapped around Maggie like a comforting embrace. It had only been a few days since she started working at Street Vincent's Community Kitchen, but already something inside her had shifted. She had spent her first night tossing and turning, replaying everything that had happened. The moment Carter had fired her, the look of gratitude in Alice's eyes, and of course, the unexpected presence of Keanu Reeves. Even now, as she wiped down a table after the lunchtime rush, her thoughts kept circling back to him. He hadn't just given her a job lead. He had given her a second chance, and she wasn't about to waste it. A new purpose. "You did good today, Maggie," Mary, the kitchen's manager, said as she stacked empty trays. "The guests love you. You've got a way of making them feel seen." Maggie felt a warmth spread through her chest at the compliment. "Thanks," she said, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I think I needed this place more than it needed me." Mary smiled knowingly. That's how it starts. One act of kindness, and before you know it, you're part of something bigger than yourself. Maggie glanced around the dining area. People of all ages and backgrounds sharing a meal, exchanging stories, finding a moment of peace in a world that often ignored them. She had spent so much time at Starbucks, serving overpriced drinks to people who rarely even looked her in the eye. But here, people weren't just customers. They were human beings, each carrying their own struggles, their own stories. And she wanted to hear them all. A familiar face. Later that afternoon, as the last few guests trickled out, Maggie was refilling the coffee dispenser when a shadow fell across the counter. She looked up and nearly dropped the carafe. Keanu Reeves stood there, hands in his jacket pockets, the corners of his mouth tugged into a small smile. "You again," she breathed, surprised but secretly pleased. "Me again," he echoed. "I told you this was your place." Maggie chuckled, shaking her head. "What? Do you have a sixth sense for struggling baristas in need of direction?" Keanu leaned on the counter. "Something like that." She studied him for a moment. He looked the same, casual, effortless, like he belonged anywhere and nowhere all at once. "Are you here to eat?" she asked, motioning to the trays of food still available. "Nah," he said, then hesitated before adding, "Well, maybe a coffee." Maggie grinned. "That I can do." As she poured him a cup, she felt the weight of curiosity pressing on her. "Can I ask you something?" Keanu nodded, taking a sip of the coffee. "Shoot. Why were you at Starbucks that day? I mean, you could go anywhere. Why that place?" A flicker of amusement crossed his face. "Believe it or not, I actually like Starbucks sometimes. It's simple, quiet." He shrugged. "And that day, I was just observing." "Observing what?" Keanu set the coffee down, his gaze locking onto hers. "You." Maggie felt her breath hitch slightly. "Me. I saw you before the whole incident," he explained. "The way you treated customers, the way you looked at the food being thrown out, the way you watched that woman. Alice, like you felt something. That's rare." Maggie swallowed hard. She had never thought anyone noticed those things, let alone Keanu Reeves. "You think too highly of me," she said, shaking her head. "Not at all," he replied. "I just think the world needs more people who care." Maggie let his words sink in. For so long, she had thought kindness was just something small, something unnoticed. But Keanu was right. It mattered. And maybe, just maybe, it could lead to something greater. A new mission. Over the next few weeks, Maggie threw herself into her work at Street Vincent's. She learned the guests' names, their stories, their struggles. She found herself staying late, helping Mary organize donations, brainstorming ways to expand their outreach. One evening, as she was locking up, she spotted Alice sitting outside on the curb, staring up at the night sky. Maggie walked over and sat beside her. "Not too cold out tonight," she said. Alice smiled faintly. "Not yet." They sat in silence for a moment before Alice spoke again. "You know, I used to be a teacher." Maggie blinked. "Really?" Alice nodded. "English literature. Taught for nearly 30 years. Maggie had never imagined it. Alice always seemed so fragile, so lost. "What happened?" she asked gently. Alice sighed. "Life. A few bad decisions. A husband who left. Medical bills. Before I knew it, here I was." Maggie's heart ached. "That's not fair," she whispered. Alice chuckled softly. "Life isn't about fair, dear. It's about what you do with what you're given." Maggie looked at her, really looked at her. And in that moment, an idea began to form. The proposal. The next morning, Maggie stormed into Street Vincent's kitchen, her heart pounding with excitement. "Mary," she said breathlessly, "what if we did more than just feed people?" Mary raised an eyebrow. "Go on." "What if we offered more? Education programs, job training, basic skills, something to help them, not just sustain them." Mary leaned back, studying her. "That's ambitious. But it's possible, right?" Maggie pressed. "People like Alice. She used to be a teacher. There are so many like her, people who just need a second chance. What if we could give them one? Mary smiled slowly. You know, you remind me a lot of myself when I first started here. Maggie felt a surge of hope. Let's do it, Mary said finally. Let's find a way to make it happen. A powerful ally. A week later, as Maggie was scrubbing down the counters, she heard someone clear their throat behind her. She turned and froze. Keanu Reeves stood there, but this time, he wasn't alone. Beside him was a woman in a sharp navy blue suit, holding a leather-bound folder. Maggie, Keanu said with a grin, I heard you have an idea. Maggie swallowed, her pulse racing. I do. He gestured to the woman. This is Sophie. She's a grant writer, and she's really good at making things happen. Maggie's jaw nearly dropped. You want to help? She asked, barely able to believe it. Keanu smiled. Let's just say, I believe in what you're doing. Maggie looked between him and Sophie, realization dawning on her. This wasn't just a second chance. This was a movement, and she was ready. A movement begins. Maggie sat in the quiet of the street Vincent's community kitchen, her fingers gripping the edges of a steaming coffee cup. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly above her, casting a warm glow over the empty dining area. The lunch rush had died down, and now only the faint echoes of laughter and conversation lingered in the air. But Maggie's mind was far from calm. She stared at the folder in front of her, the one Sophie, the grant writer Keanu had introduced her to, had placed on the table just moments ago. Inside were pages upon pages of possibilities. A proposal, a funding request, a blueprint for something bigger. For weeks now, Maggie had been working tirelessly, pouring her heart into an idea that had started as just a whisper of a dream, turning Street Vincent's into more than just a soup kitchen. She wanted a program, a real, structured program that could help the homeless not just survive but thrive. Education classes, job training, mental health resources, a place where people like Alice, people who had once been teachers, workers, dreamers, could find their footing again. And now, it was real, more real than it had ever been. Deep in thought, she jumped slightly, her eyes snapping up to meet the familiar, amused gaze of Keanu Reeves. He leaned against the doorway, a paper coffee cup in his hand, dressed in his usual effortless style. Black jeans, a dark gray sweater, and an air of quiet confidence. Maggie exhaled, a smile tugging at her lips. You have a habit of showing up right when I need a push, you know that. Keanu chuckled, stepping into the room and sliding into the seat across from her. And here I thought I was just getting a cup of coffee. Maggie smirked. Sure you were. His gaze flickered to the folder in front of her. So, what's the verdict? Maggie hesitated. I don't know, she admitted. It's big. Bigger than anything I've ever done. What if I screw it up? Keanu leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. You won't. Maggie sighed. You say that like it's a guarantee. It is, he said simply. Because you care. That's what makes the difference. You're not doing this for money. You're not doing this for recognition. You're doing it because you see people. And people like you. They don't fail. They just learn and keep going. Maggie bit her lip, looking down at the folder again. You know, Keanu continued, his voice softer now. I've met a lot of people in my life. Famous people, powerful people. But the ones that impress me the most, they're the ones like you. The ones who don't just say they care, they show it. Maggie swallowed the lump in her throat. She had never considered herself anything special. She was just a former barista who had made a small choice. One muffin, one moment of kindness. And yet, somehow, that single moment had led her here. Keanu leaned back, giving her space to think. So, what do you need to get this started? Maggie blinked at him. You mean? I mean, he said, tilting his head. How can I help? Maggie inhaled sharply. Keanu, I can't. You can, he cut in gently. And you should. She hesitated, but then she saw it, the sincerity in his gaze. He wasn't offering because he felt obligated. He wanted to be a part of this. She exhaled slowly. We need funding, space, resources, and people who can teach, people who can mentor, people who believe in second chances. Keanu nodded. Okay. Maggie frowned slightly. Okay. He smirked. Yeah. Okay. Let's make it happen. Maggie gaped at him. You say that like it's as simple as ordering a coffee. He laughed. I mean, it won't be. But I know people, and I know how to get things moving. Maggie's heart pounded. Was this actually happening? Before she could fully process it, the door swung open, and Mary strode in, holding a clipboard. She paused when she saw Keanu. Ah, our mysterious benefactor returns, she said with a raised eyebrow. Keanu grinned. Maggie's the one leading this charge. I'm just here to help. Mary glanced between them. Help? Huh. That's good. Because if we're really doing this, we're going to need all the help we can get. She dropped the clipboard onto the table, crossing her arms. So, tell me, Reeves, you ever fund a nonprofit before? Keanu chuckled. Not personally. But I know people who have. Mary studied him for a long moment before nodding. All right, let's get to work. The first step. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Keanu pulled strings, making calls to people Maggie couldn't even dream of reaching. Within days, a philanthropic organization had expressed interest in funding part of their project. A local business owner agreed to donate supplies, and an empty building, just a few blocks from Street Vincent's, was offered up as a potential training center. Maggie barely had time to breathe. She was writing proposals, attending meetings, talking to volunteers, all while still working her shifts at the kitchen. And every step of the way, Keanu was there. Not in the spotlight, not making it about him, but quietly supporting, guiding, believing in what they were building. One night, as they sat on the curb outside Street Vincent's, eating takeout after a long day, Maggie turned to him. You know, I still don't understand why you're doing this, she said. Keanu took a sip of his drink before responding. Because I know what it's like to feel lost, he said simply. And I know what it's like when someone gives you a reason to keep going. Maggie felt a lump form in her throat. Who gave you that? She asked softly. Keanu smiled faintly, staring off into the distance. A few people. A friend when I was younger. A mentor when I started out. Sometimes, all it takes is one person believing in you to change everything. Maggie nodded, understanding completely. Because for her, that person had been him. A grand opening. 2 months later, the Second Chance Initiative officially opened its doors. What had once been a simple soup kitchen was now something more. A place where people could learn, rebuild, and find hope. Alice was their first literacy teacher. A former chef who had fallen on hard times now led cooking classes. A small team of volunteers, including social workers and career counselors, helped guide people back on their feet. And on opening day, as Maggie stood in front of a crowd of reporters, volunteers, and community members, she took a deep breath. This all started with a single act of kindness, she said, her voice steady. And I hope that today it is just the first of many. As the applause filled the air, she glanced to the side, where Keanu stood, watching with a quiet smile. She didn't need to say anything. They both knew. This was only the beginning. The storm before the calm. Maggie stood in the middle of the Second Chance Initiative, watching as volunteers bustled around, setting up for the next wave of visitors. The hum of activity, the clinking of plates, the rustling of paperwork, the occasional bursts of laughter, was something she had grown to love. It had been 3 months since the grand opening, and the transformation was beyond anything she had imagined. What had once been an old, neglected building was now a hub of hope. Alice, the elderly woman she had once given a muffin to, now taught literacy classes 3 times a week. A group of former chefs who had struggled with homelessness ran culinary training programs for people looking to get back into the workforce. A small business mentorship program had launched, helping people develop skills to apply for jobs or even start their own ventures. And every day, more people walked through the doors looking for a second chance. Maggie should have been ecstatic. And yet, something wasn't right. A growing shadow. The success of the initiative had caught media attention. News outlets had run inspiring pieces about the project, painting it as a beacon of kindness and redemption. But with that success came scrutiny. And Maggie could feel the weight of it pressing down on her. She had started noticing men in suits coming around, standing just outside the building, talking in hushed voices. City officials had begun asking more questions than before. And last night, she had received a notice, a formal letter from the city council, stating that the building was being reviewed for zoning violations. Maggie's stomach churned as she reread the letter for the third time. What's wrong? She looked up to find Keanu Reeves leaning against the doorway, arms crossed, a concerned look on his face. Maggie sighed and handed him the letter. His eyes scanned the page, his jaw tightening slightly. Zoning violations. This sounds like bureaucratic nonsense. Exactly, Maggie muttered. They're claiming we don't have the right permits to operate as an education and rehabilitation center. But we checked all this before opening. Mary made sure everything was in place. Keanu nodded slowly. Someone wants to shut you down. Maggie exhaled sharply. I don't get it. Why? We're helping people. We're not hurting anyone. Keanu placed the letter down and met her gaze. Not everyone likes seeing change, Maggie. And some people, especially people in power, don't like losing control. Maggie's fists clenched. This isn't fair. No, Keanu agreed. It's not. But that doesn't mean we give up. Maggie took a deep breath. What do we do? Keanu smirked slightly. We fight. Enemies in the shadows. Maggie and Mary spent the next few days digging through city records, trying to find out who had filed a complaint. It didn't take long. An investment group, one that had recently purchased multiple properties in the area, and had their eyes on the building Maggie and her team had transformed. They want to turn this place into luxury condos, Mary growled, slamming the documents on the table. Maggie felt sick. They don't care about the people here, she whispered. Mary shook her head. Not even a little. Maggie rubbed her temples. Okay, so what do we do? Mary exhaled. They have money, lawyers, power. Keanu, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up. Then we make this bigger than them. Maggie frowned. What do you mean? He leaned forward, his eyes burning with intensity. We take this fight to the public, to the media, to every person who believes in what we're doing. We shine a light on them, and we make it impossible for them to do this in the shadows. Maggie hesitated. That could get messy. Keanu shrugged. So is life. She bit her lip. He wasn't wrong. If they stayed silent, they would lose. But if they fought back, they had a chance. Maggie looked at Keanu. You're really in this, aren't you? He chuckled. I told you, I believe in this, and I believe in you. Her heart swelled. All right, she said, taking a deep breath. Let's do this. The battle for second chances. The next day, Maggie, Keanu, and Mary launched a full-scale awareness campaign. Local news stations were contacted. Social media posts were made, sharing real stories from people whose lives had been changed by the initiative. Supporters began gathering outside the building, holding signs that read, People over profit. Second chances save lives. We won't be silenced. And then, the biggest shock of all. Keanu went on national television. Sitting across from a well-known talk show host, he spoke passionately about the initiative. This isn't about me, he said. This is about the people who have been given a second chance, and the people trying to take it away. The internet exploded. Keanu Reeves wasn't just an actor. He was an advocate for something real. And suddenly, the story wasn't just local news anymore. It was everywhere. The turning point. 3 days later, the city council announced that they were dropping the review. The investment group backed off completely. Maggie read the statement over and over, barely able to believe it. "We won," she whispered. Keanu, standing beside her, grinned. "We won." Mary let out a whoop of joy, and the entire kitchen erupted into cheers. Alice wiped her eyes, whispering, "I never thought I'd see something like this happen." Maggie turned to Keanu, her heart full. "I couldn't have done this without you." Keanu shook his head. "You would have. I just helped clear the path." Maggie swallowed hard, emotion rising in her throat. "I don't know how to thank you." Keanu smirked. "Buy me a coffee." Maggie laughed. "Deal. A future worth fighting for." As the celebration died down and the night set in, Maggie stepped outside, looking up at the stars. She had almost lost everything. But instead, she had gained more than she ever imagined. A purpose, a movement, a family. And standing beside her in the moonlight was a man who had shown her that one act of kindness could change the world. "Where do we go from here?" she asked softly. Keanu smiled. "Wherever you want, Maggie. Wherever you want." And for the first time, in a long time, she knew exactly where she was meant to be. The weight of a revolution. The victory had been unbelievable. For the first time, Maggie felt like she had truly changed something. They had stood up to powerful forces and won. But the battle had left her exhausted. The news coverage, the legal fight, the endless stress. It had been weeks of war. And now that the dust had settled, a strange emptiness settled inside her. What now? She had spent so much time fighting to keep the initiative alive that she hadn't stopped to think about what came next. And as she sat on the rooftop of the Second Chance Initiative, watching the sun dip below the skyline, she realized something terrifying. This was just the beginning. The cost of change. The media attention had brought waves of new people to their doorstep. People desperate for help. People curious about the movement. People who wanted to be part of something bigger. The initiative exploded overnight. What had once been a simple community kitchen had now become a national conversation. But with that attention came new challenges. They needed more space. They needed more funding. They needed more structure. Maggie had gone from being a barista to leading a movement, and she wasn't sure she was ready. A late-night conversation. One evening, Maggie found herself in the kitchen long after everyone else had gone home. The weight of it all pressed on her chest. She was running out of time, out of energy, out of ideas. And then he showed up. "You look like you haven't slept in days," Keanu said, stepping into the kitchen. Maggie glanced up from her notes, dark circles under her eyes. "What gave it away?" He smirked, sliding into the seat across from her. "The fact that you're trying to drink coffee at 1 in the morning." She sighed, setting her mug down. "I don't know how to do this, Keanu." "Do what?" "Lead," she admitted. "I don't know how to run a movement. I don't know how to scale this. I was just a barista. I'm not qualified for this." Keanu studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he leaned back, stretching his arms over the chair. "You think I knew what I was doing when I started acting?" he asked. Maggie frowned. "That's different. You had talent." He laughed. "Maggie, I was a terrible actor when I started. I had no idea what I was doing. I was scared out of my mind. But I kept showing up. I kept learning. And I figured it out." She exhaled. "And you think that's what I should do?" Keanu nodded. "You already know the most important part, how to care. The rest, you'll learn." Maggie swallowed hard. "What if I fail?" Keanu smiled. "Then you try again." Building the future. The next morning, Maggie woke up with renewed determination. She wasn't going to let doubt win. She gathered Mary, Alice, and a few of their most dedicated volunteers and laid out a new plan. Phase 1. Expansion. They would launch a fundraising campaign to buy a second building. They would partner with local businesses to create job opportunities for people in the program. They would train volunteers to take on leadership roles. Phase 2. National outreach. They would create online courses to help people in other cities start their own versions of the Second Chance initiative. They would partner with colleges to offer free education to program participants. They would use social media to share real stories of transformation. It was ambitious. It was terrifying. But Maggie wasn't alone anymore. And with Keanu still backing her, she knew they could make it happen. The fundraiser that changed everything. 2 weeks later, they launched a massive charity event. A gala. A night of celebration, storytelling, and raising funds. Keanu hosted the event himself, using his influence to bring in business leaders, celebrities, and philanthropists. Maggie had never been in a room with so many powerful people before. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid. She walked onto the stage, took a deep breath, and told her story. She spoke about Alice, about the people they had helped, about the muffin that had started it all. And by the end of the night, they had raised over $10 million, enough to change thousands of lives. Maggie stood at the edge of the ballroom, overwhelmed, watching as people celebrated. Keanu stepped up beside her, holding a glass of champagne. "You did it," he said. Maggie turned to him, shaking her head in disbelief. "No, we did it." Keanu chuckled. "And you're just getting started." Maggie smiled, looking out at the future she was building. He was right. This was just the beginning. The legacy of a second chance. The months that followed the gala were a blur of success, growth, and unexpected challenges. Maggie had never imagined that what had started as a simple act of kindness, handing a muffin to Alice, would snowball into a nationwide movement. But here she was, sitting in the heart of the Second Chance initiative, watching as new participants walked in each day, each with their own story of hardship, resilience, and hope. The doors had become a symbol of what was possible, a sanctuary for those who had been forgotten by society. They had expanded, not just in the city, but across the country. Through a new online platform, they were now helping thousands of people in other states rebuild their lives, offering everything from job training to education programs to mentorship. The initiative had become a force that Maggie now had to lead. She had graduated from the role of barista to full-time visionary. But in many ways, the weight of leadership felt heavier than ever. The strain of leadership. As Maggie sat at her desk, scrolling through emails and reports, a thought began to gnaw at her. Had she lost herself? The emails, one after another, came in with good news. Grant approvals, corporate sponsorships, partnerships with universities, volunteers signing up in droves. But with each success came a new challenge. The decisions were becoming more complicated. There were meetings to attend, negotiations to oversee, budgets to balance. Maggie had once been the one who simply served. She had spent years making coffee, building relationships with customers, and listening. But now she was making life-altering decisions for hundreds, if not thousands, of people. She looked at the framed picture of Alice, the woman who had sparked everything. It had been taken on the day of the gala, when Alice had stood up to speak in front of a crowd of over 1,000 people, sharing her own journey of transformation. Alice had said that Maggie's kindness had given her hope. But the truth was, it had been Alice's courage that had sparked Maggie's own fire. "Maybe I need a break," Maggie whispered to herself. She leaned back in her chair, running her hands through her hair, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on her. Her phone buzzed on the desk. It was a message from Keanu. Keanu's wisdom. The message read, "You're doing great, just don't forget to breathe." Maggie smiled as she tapped out a response. "I don't know if I'm doing great. I feel like I'm failing at it all." It didn't take long for him to reply. "I get it, but let me ask you something. Do you feel like you're making a difference?" Maggie thought for a moment. Of course she did. She saw it every day in the smiles of the people they helped. The graduates of their programs who were now working full-time jobs. The families they had reunited. The people who had once been on the streets but now had homes and hope. Yes, Maggie wrote, her fingers steady as she typed. I see it every day. Then that's all that matters. The pressure of expectations. Despite Keanu's words, the pressure continued to build. Maggie found herself questioning her every decision. Were they expanding too quickly? Were they losing sight of their mission in the pursuit of growth? Were they making a real impact or just running on the momentum of their success? It all came to a head one evening, after a major fundraising partnership fell through. The board of directors was pushing for new, more corporate donors, but Maggie felt like they were losing sight of their original vision. She had fought for the initiative to be a grassroots movement, but now it was becoming something else entirely. A heart-to-heart with Alice. Maggie needed to talk to someone. And there was only one person she could go to. Alice. She found Alice sitting in the garden behind the building, gazing at the blooming flowers. Her once weathered face had softened, and the years of hardship seemed to have given way to an undeniable strength. Mind if I sit? Maggie asked. Alice smiled and gestured to the bench beside her. Of course, child. Maggie sat down, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders simply by being near Alice. For a few moments, they sat in silence, the only sound the rustling of the leaves in the evening breeze. Finally, Maggie spoke. Alice, I'm not sure what I'm doing anymore. Alice turned her head, her eyes filled with quiet understanding. What do you mean? I feel like I've lost control of this, Maggie said, her voice tinged with frustration. It's grown so big. And now, I don't know if I'm helping anymore or just managing a machine. Alice chuckled softly, her eyes twinkling. You remind me of myself when I was teaching. I started with one class, and then it grew into a department. And I thought, how did I get here? I just wanted to make a difference in their lives, not get lost in the paperwork. Maggie looked at Alice, seeing the wisdom in her eyes. What did you do? Alice shrugged gently. I learned that the biggest changes happen in the smallest moments. Don't lose sight of why you started this, Maggie. It wasn't for the money, or the accolades, or the buildings. It was for the people. Maggie let Alice's words settle deep within her. It was so easy to get caught up in the system, to lose track of the humanity at the heart of it all. I started with a muffin, Alice, Maggie whispered. Maybe I need to go back to that. Back to the beginning. The next day, Maggie walked into the Second Chance initiative with a new resolve. She didn't need to keep chasing success. She needed to remember the heart of it all. Instead of focusing on expanding too quickly, she focused on deepening the relationships with the people already there. She started visiting every class, talking to every participant, and getting her hands dirty in the day-to-day operations. It was a shift in perspective, and it was exactly what the initiative needed. Soon after, Maggie set up a new mentorship program, where people from the community who had found success with the initiative could give back by mentoring new participants. This allowed for sustainable growth without losing sight of the mission. Keanu's return. One afternoon, as Maggie was finishing up a meeting with local mentors, she looked up to find Keanu standing at the door, smiling. You look like you're finally breathing again, he said with a grin. Maggie smiled back, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. I think I'd finally figured it out. Keanu raised an eyebrow. What's the secret? I had to remember that the real success isn't in the numbers. It's in the people. It's about the lives we're changing, not the size of the building or the amount of money we raise. Keanu nodded in approval. Glad to hear it. I knew you'd get there. A new beginning. As the years passed, the Second Chance initiative flourished, not because of its size, but because of its heart. Maggie's focus shifted to creating deep, meaningful impact in each community they touched. Instead of expanding too rapidly, they worked to solidify their roots, ensuring that every person who walked through their doors received not just a meal, but a true second chance. And through it all, Keanu remained a steadfast ally, quietly supporting her, helping where he could, and believing in the cause. In the end, Maggie learned that the greatest movements aren't built by a single person. They're built by a community of people who are willing to care, to fight, and to believe in each other. And it all started with one simple, small act of kindness, a muffin shared with a stranger.